When Rome went to war, victory was never just about defeating armies. It was about breaking symbols, and among the most powerful symbols of resistance were queens, women who embodied conquered nations, royal bloodlines, and defiance against Roman rule. When these queens were captured, Roman soldiers did not see them as individuals. They saw them as trophies of empire. In Roman military culture, mercy was optional, but dominance was mandatory. Captured queens were stripped of their political identity first. Their crowns, titles, and royal clothing were taken away, replaced with simple garments meant to erase their status. This act alone sent a message to both the Roman troops and the conquered people. Rome had absolute control. After capture, queens were often paraded through military camps or cities. These public displays were not random cruelty. They were carefully calculated theater. Roman soldiers were taught that humiliation was as effective as execution. To show a queen in chains was to declare that even the highest-born enemy could be reduced to nothing under Roman power. Some queens were forced to walk in Roman triumphs, grand victory parades held in Rome itself. Here, thousands of citizens would witness their defeat. The silence, the stares, the mocking cheers. This psychological punishment was deliberate. It transformed a once revered ruler into a living warning. Resistance leads to disgrace. Behind the scenes, captivity was harsh and uncertain. Queens were often held under guard, isolated, and denied any influence or dignity. Their fate depended entirely on Roman political needs. Some were executed after the triumph. Others disappeared into exile or imprisonment, never recorded again. Survival did not mean freedom. It meant erasure. Rome justified these actions through ideology. Romans believed that total domination was necessary to maintain order. By destroying the image of a queen, they believed they were preventing future rebellions. Fear was policy. Humiliation was strategy. Yet history remembers these women not as Rome intended. Figures like Boudica, Cleopatra, and Zenobia are remembered not for their defeat, but for their resistance. Rome tried to turn queens into warnings, but instead they became legends, and in doing so, they exposed the dark machinery behind one of history's greatest empires. Roman warfare was never limited to the battlefield. While legions were trained to defeat enemy armies with discipline and precision, Roman commanders understood that true conquest required something deeper, the destruction of meaning. Symbols mattered. Cities could be rebuilt, armies could be re-raised, but symbols, once broken, were far harder to restore. Among these symbols, queens held immense power. They were not only rulers, but living representations of a people's identity, pride, and resistance. To defeat a queen was to defeat the idea of independence itself. In many ancient societies Rome encountered, queens were more than ceremonial figures. They embodied divine favor, ancestral legitimacy, and national unity. Their presence inspired loyalty, and their survival after defeat could reignite rebellion. Roman military doctrine recognized this danger early. As a result, campaigns were often designed with the capture or neutralization of royal figures as a primary objective. Eliminating leadership was not enough. Rome sought to dismantle the emotional bond between a ruler and her people. This approach was rooted in Roman psychology and propaganda. Roman soldiers were taught that fear preserved peace better than mercy. By targeting queens, Rome sent a message that resistance would not merely fail, it would be publicly undone. When a queen fell into Roman hands, her defeat became a weapon. Her capture was announced, displayed, and exaggerated, spreading terror far beyond the battlefield. Entire regions could be pacified without further fighting once they witnessed what happened to their most powerful symbols. Rome's obsession with symbolism extended into every phase of conquest. Temples were looted, sacred standards destroyed, and royal insignia confiscated. But queens were unique. Unlike objects, they were living proof of Roman supremacy. Their humiliation was meant to be seen, remembered, and repeated in stories told across provinces. Roman soldiers understood they were participating in something larger than warfare. They were enforcing imperial ideology. This strategy also reinforced loyalty within the legions. Soldiers were conditioned to view conquered royalty not as humans but as embodiments of defeated nations. This dehumanization made harsh treatment easier to justify and strengthened the belief that Rome was destined to rule. If even a queen could be reduced to powerlessness, then Rome's authority was unquestionable. Discipline, brutality, and symbolism fused into a single system of control. By attacking symbols instead of merely enemies, Rome achieved efficiency. Rebellions became rarer when hope itself was crushed. Queens, who once commanded armies, now served as silent warnings. Their loss shattered myths of divine protection and royal invincibility. Rome did not simply conquer lands, it conquered narratives. And in that calculated destruction of symbols, the empire secured its dominance for centuries, leaving behind victories that echoed far longer than the clash of swords. For Rome, capturing a queen was only the beginning. The real objective was not physical control, but psychological dismantling. Roman soldiers and officials understood that a queen's power did not come solely from armies or wealth, but from perception. As long as she appeared royal, dignified, and commanding, she remained dangerous. Stripping her of identity was therefore a calculated act of domination, designed to sever the bond between the ruler and her people. The process began immediately after capture. Royal clothing, jewelry, and insignia were removed, not for practical reasons, but for symbolism. These items represented legitimacy, divine favor, and ancestral authority. By taking them away, Rome aimed to visually erase the queen's status. To Roman eyes, clothing was a language. A queen dressed as a common captive sent a clear message. Her authority no longer existed. Soldiers witnessing this transformation absorbed the lesson that Rome had the power to redefine reality itself. Names and titles were also weaponized. In Roman records, captured queens were often reduced to generic labels: the woman, the barbarian, or simply omitted altogether. This linguistic erasure was intentional. By denying them their titles, Rome denied their past. Identity, once removed from official memory, could not inspire rebellion. Future generations would read Roman histories and find conquerors celebrated, while defeated queens faded into footnotes or silence. Isolation played a crucial role in this strategy. Queens were frequently separated from their attendants, advisors, and family members. Without the court that reinforced their authority, they became vulnerable and powerless. Roman guards controlled not only their movements, but also their access to information. Cut off from news of their homeland, a queen could no longer act as a rallying figure. She became a prisoner not just of chains, but of uncertainty. Public exposure further deepened this loss of identity. When shown to Roman soldiers or civilians, queens were displayed not as rulers, but as evidence of Rome's superiority. The intention was to redefine how they were seen, by enemies, allies, and even themselves. Repeated humiliation wore down resistance, replacing defiance with survival. Rome understood that breaking the mind was often more effective than breaking the body. This stripping of identity also served an administrative purpose. A queen without status could be disposed of as need executed, imprisoned, or exiled, without political consequence. She no longer represented a sovereign power. In Roman logic, once identity was erased, legitimacy died with it. The conquered people were left without a figure to unite around, and resistance lost its human face. Through these methods, Rome transformed queens from symbols of independence into reminders of defeat. The loss of crown, name, and dignity was not accidental cruelty. it was policy. And in that quiet destruction of identity, Rome ensured that even in survival, a captured queen could no longer threaten the empire's control. For the Romans, humiliation was not an emotional reaction to victory. It was a calculated military tool. Roman commanders believed that fear, when carefully displayed, could achieve what endless battles could not. Public humiliation of captured queens served a precise purpose. It demonstrated Rome's absolute authority while discouraging future resistance. Violence could defeat armies, but humiliation could conquer minds. Roman military culture valued spectacle. Soldiers were trained to understand that how a victory was shown mattered as much as the victory itself. A defeated queen, once revered and untouchable, became the most powerful visual proof of Roman dominance. Her presence in chains or under guard was meant to shock observers into submission. If a queen could be brought low, then no one was beyond Rome's reach. This humiliation was rarely spontaneous. It followed patterns refined over generations of conquest. Roman leaders understood that rebellion often began with belief, the belief that Rome could be challenged. By publicly degrading a queen, they destroyed that belief. Entire cities would surrender upon hearing what had happened to their ruler, choosing obedience over the risk of similar disgrace. Fear spread faster than legions ever could. Roman soldiers also played a role in reinforcing this system. Participating in acts of humiliation strengthened group loyalty and obedience. Soldiers were taught to see conquered royalty as symbols, not people. This dehumanization made harsh treatment easier and normalized cruelty as duty. Humiliation became a shared ritual of power, binding soldiers to Rome's ideology and reminding them of their place within the imperial machine. The public nature of these acts was essential. Humiliation loses power when hidden. Displaying a captured queen in military camps, occupied cities, or formal ceremonies ensured maximum psychological impact. Local populations were forced to witness the collapse of their leadership. The image lingered long after Roman troops moved on, discouraging uprisings and weakening morale. Roman writers openly acknowledged this strategy. Triumphs, parades, and public displays were praised not just for celebrating victory, but for reinforcing social order. Humiliation was framed as justice, a punishment for defiance. This moral justification allowed Roman society to accept cruelty as necessary, even honorable. By embedding humiliation into law, ceremony, and tradition, Rome transformed brutality into policy. For the queens themselves, this experience was devastating. Their authority depended on public perception, and Rome deliberately reshaped that perception. Each forced appearance chipped away at the image of sovereignty. Silence, restraint, and endurance became the only options for survival. Resistance in such circumstances was nearly impossible, which was precisely the point. In the Roman world, public humiliation prevented future wars. By turning defeat into spectacle, Rome claimed to save lives in the long term, even as it destroyed dignity in the present. This belief justified centuries of domination. Humiliation was not excess, it was strategy, and through it, Rome ruled not only territory, but memory, fear, and imagination across the ancient world. In ancient Rome, victory was incomplete until it was displayed. Triumph parades were not merely celebrations, they were carefully choreographed demonstrations of power designed to shape how history would be remembered. When captured queens were forced to appear in these processions, their presence served a political purpose far beyond entertainment. The parade transformed military success into a public lesson about Rome's dominance and the consequences of defiance. A Roman triumph was granted only by the Senate and followed strict rituals. The victorious general rode through the streets while crowds gathered to witness the spoils of war. Behind him marched prisoners, treasures, and symbols taken from conquered lands. When a queen appeared among them, the impact was profound. She was no longer a distant ruler commanding armies, but a silent figure reduced to a spectacle. Her defeat was no longer rumor. It was undeniable reality. For the Roman population, this display reinforced confidence in the empire. Seeing a defeated queen validated the belief that Rome was unstoppable and divinely favored. It reassured citizens that their leaders could protect them from foreign threats. Triumphs strengthened national identity by contrasting Roman order with the perceived chaos and weakness of Rome's enemies. The presence of a queen magnified this contrast, as royalty symbolized the highest possible authority now brought low. For conquered peoples, the message was far darker. News of a queen's appearance in a triumph traveled quickly across provinces. Even those who never witnessed the parade felt its impact. The knowledge that a revered leader had been publicly displayed in Rome crushed hopes of resistance. The triumph turned individual defeat into collective submission, discouraging rebellion long after the legions had departed. These parades were designed to erase context and complexity. The reasons for resistance, the bravery of the defeated, and the suffering of war were all stripped away. What remained was a simple narrative: Rome victorious, enemies humbled. A queen's presence reduced an entire culture's struggle to a single image of surrender. This visual storytelling was far more powerful than written decrees or military garrisons. For the queens themselves, triumphs represented the final loss of agency. They were forced into a role written by their conquerors, unable to speak or defend their actions. Silence became part of the punishment. Every step through Rome's streets reinforced the transformation from sovereign to symbol. Survival after the triumph did not restore dignity. It merely extended captivity in a different form. Politically, triumphs also served the ambitions of Roman generals. Displaying high-ranking prisoners elevated a commander's prestige and justified his authority. A queen in chains enhanced the general's reputation and strengthened his position within Roman politics. Thus, the humiliation of captured royalty was tied directly to power struggles at the heart of Rome itself. By turning defeated queens into living trophies, triumph parades fused spectacle with statecraft. They ensured that victory was not only achieved, but remembered in the way Rome desired. Through ceremony and display, Rome rewrote the meaning of conquest, transforming resistance into shame and power into silence before the eyes of an empire. Rome believed that fear could erase memory, but history proved otherwise. The empire's treatment of captured queens was designed to crush resistance and prevent future uprisings, yet in many cases it achieved the opposite. By humiliating, imprisoning, or erasing these women from power, Rome unintentionally elevated them into enduring symbols of defiance. The very brutality meant to silence them ensured they would be remembered long after Roman victories faded. Queens who challenged Rome were already extraordinary figures, commanding armies and uniting fragmented peoples against one of the most powerful forces in history. When Rome subjected them to public humiliation or captivity, their suffering did not diminish their legacy. Instead, it humanized them. To their people, these queens became martyrs rather than failures. Defeat, when paired with visible injustice, often strengthened collective memory instead of destroying it. Roman propaganda sought to control the narrative by reducing defeated queens to trophies or footnotes. Yet oral traditions, local histories, and later writers preserved alternative perspectives. Stories of courage, sacrifice, and resistance survived in ways Roman records could not fully suppress. While Rome documented conquest, conquered peoples remembered struggle. Over time, these parallel histories reshaped how the past was understood. Figures such as Boudica and Zenobia illustrate this reversal perfectly. Rome portrayed them as rebels who needed to be crushed, but later generations remembered them as leaders who dared to defy imperial domination. Their resistance became a source of pride, inspiring cultural identity long after Roman authority disappeared. Rome's attempt to humiliate these queens ultimately granted them a kind of immortality the empire itself could not control. This backfiring effect highlights a weakness in Rome's strategy. Fear can silence opposition temporarily, but it cannot erase admiration or shared memory. The spectacle of humiliation created emotional resonance. Witnesses, both Roman and foreign, recognized the imbalance of power on display. Sympathy often followed, quietly undermining Rome's moral authority. Even within Rome, some observers questioned the justice of such treatment, revealing cracks in the empire's ideological armor. In the long term, these queens came to symbolize resistance against oppression rather than defeat. Their stories were retold during later struggles against domination, used as examples of courage in the face of overwhelming force. Rome sought to turn them into warnings, but warnings can also become inspirations. Each retelling stripped Rome of its intended message and replaced it with one of resilience. Ironically, Rome's own success ensured the survival of these legends. As Roman historians recorded campaigns and triumphs, they preserved the names of the very queens Rome tried to erase. Later historians revisited these accounts, often with greater sympathy for the defeated. What began as propaganda evolved into testimony of resistance. In the end, Rome conquered territories, but it failed to conquer memory. The empire collapsed, its legions vanished, and its cities fell silent. Yet the queens who stood against Rome remain vivid in history. Through cruelty and spectacle, Rome attempted to control the future, but instead, it ensured that its enemies would be remembered not as victims, but as enduring symbols of defiance and strength. Rome wanted obedience, not remembrance. By targeting queens, the empire believed it could erase resistance at its source. Crowns were taken, names were stripped away, and dignity was crushed beneath ceremony and spectacle. To Rome, these women were meant to become warnings, living proof that defiance led only to silence and submission. But history does not always obey empires. What Rome failed to understand was that power imposed through humiliation leaves behind scars that memory refuses to forget. The very acts meant to destroy identity preserved it. Captured queens became symbols not of defeat, but of courage against impossible odds. Their suffering revealed the machinery of empire in its rawest form, exposing how fear, spectacle, and domination were used to maintain control. Rome ruled lands and armies, but it could not rule how these stories would be remembered. Empires rise by conquest, but they fall by the weight of their own methods. The legions marched on, triumphs were celebrated, and crowds cheered. But centuries later, it is not the cheers we remember. It is the silence of those paraded in chains. Rome's victories faded into stone and dust, while the names of defiant queens endured in history, legend, and collective memory. In trying to erase them, Rome ensured they would never truly disappear. Thank you for watching Unsolved History. If you found this story disturbing, revealing, or eye-opening, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more hidden truths from the ancient world. Share your thoughts in the comments. History is never just about the past. It's about what power chooses to hide. Until next time, remember, the greatest empires are not judged by how they conquered, but by what they tried to silence.